There is a structure on Sunset Boulevard that has observed more romance, more treachery, and more influence than any palace in Europe. The Beverly Hills Hotel positions at the corner of Sunset and Rodeo Drive, wrapped in salmon pink stucco and surrounded by 12 acres of tropical gardens. When it opened in 1912, Beverly Hills did not exist. There were no film studios, no celebrities, no industry. There was only dust and bean fields and one man's impossible vision. The hotel would become the throne chamber of American celebrity, the location where empires were constructed over breakfast and destroyed by sunset. It would accommodate presidents and gangsters, legends and frauds, artists who transformed the world and criminals who nearly concluded it. For more than a century, fortunes have been made and forfeited behind those pink walls. Affairs have flourished in the bungalows. The Academy Awards have been conceived in its ballrooms, and through wars, scandals, boycotts, and threats of demolition, the structure has survived. This is the narrative of the Beverly Hills Hotel, Hollywood's Pink Palace. In 1906, the stretch of land that would become Beverly Hills was nothing. Dirt roads severed through abandoned bean fields where Mexican laborers had once harvested crops for the ranches that sprawled across the coastal plain. The occasional pepper tree offered shade to roadrunners and ground squirrels. Los Angeles proper concluded miles to the east. The film industry did not exist. Hollywood was a temperance community of modest residences and church socials, but one man witnessed something different in that emptiness. Burton Green was a Michigan-born oil man who had arrived to Southern California in 1900 seeking petroleum beneath the dusty hills. He discovered none. What he uncovered instead was land, 4,000 acres of it, acquired as the Rancho Rodeo de las Aguas. When oil drilling produced nothing but dust, most investors desired out. Green proposed an alternative. They would subdivide the land and generate a new category of community, a location designed not for farmers but for wealthy Easterners seeking sunshine and status. In 1906, Green hired the landscape architect Wilbur David Cook to establish streets following the natural contours rather than the rigid grid that dominated Los Angeles. Cook's curving boulevards would provide the development an air of established elegance, as if the community had existed for generations. They designated it Beverly Hills after Beverly Farms in Massachusetts, where wealthy Bostonians summered. But Green comprehended that no one would acquire residences in a development that existed only on paper. He required something to anchor the community. He required a hotel. Green approached Margaret Anderson, a Los Angeles businesswoman who had made her fortune managing apartment structures downtown. Anderson recognized opportunity. She agreed to construct and operate a luxury hotel on a 12-acre site at the corner of Sunset Boulevard and what would become Rodeo Drive. The location was strategic. When automobiles became common, Sunset would be the main artery west. Anderson commissioned the Los Angeles architect Elmer Gray to design the structure. Gray had trained in the Beaux-Arts tradition, but comprehended that Southern California demanded different aesthetics. He proposed a structure in the Mission Revival style, a romantic interpretation of California's Spanish colonial past that suggested history, permanence, a connection to the land that nouveau riche clients desperately desired to acquire. Construction commenced in 1911. The hotel would contain 325 rooms arranged around interior courtyards in the Spanish manner. The main structure stretched along Sunset Boulevard, 3 stories of reinforced concrete clad in salmon pink stucco. Gray selected the color deliberately. Pink would photograph beautifully. It would distinguish itself against brown hills and blue sky. It would be memorable. The grounds signified as much as the structure. Anderson hired landscape crews to plant 12 acres of tropical vegetation that possessed no business surviving in a semi-arid climate. Date palms from Egypt, banana trees from Central America, birds of paradise from South Africa. The effect was deliberately exotic, a fantasy of eternal springtime maintained by constant irrigation from wells drilled deep into the aquifer. The total cost approached $500,000, equivalent to roughly $15 million today. For 1912, this was an extraordinary sum to invest in a hotel located in the middle of nowhere. Anderson was betting that nowhere would soon become somewhere. The Beverly Hills Hotel opened on May 12, 1912. 7 months later, the surrounding community would incorporate as an independent city. But on opening day, Beverly Hills remained a real estate speculation. Only a handful of residences had been completed. Most lots stood vacant. Guests arrived by automobile or consumed the Pacific Electric Railway's red cars to Santa Monica Boulevard, then hired carriages to travel the remaining distance up dirt roads. The opening ceremony attracted Los Angeles society, which in 1912 signified ranchers who had struck oil, merchants who had profited from the city's explosive growth, and a handful of wealthy Midwesterners who had relocated for their health. The Los Angeles Times praised the hotel as a triumph of California architecture. What the Times could not predict was that within 3 years, an entirely new industry would emerge just miles away. In 1915, D.W. Griffith released The Birth of a Nation, a technically revolutionary and morally reprehensible film that demonstrated cinema's power to move mass audiences. The film industry centered in New York and New Jersey commenced its migration west. Southern California offered year-round sunshine, diverse landscapes, and inexpensive land for constructing studios. Within 2 years, Hollywood and the surrounding communities had become the capital of American motion pictures. The Beverly Hills Hotel was positioned perfectly. It offered privacy. It offered luxury. It offered proximity to the studios rising in Hollywood, Culver City, and Burbank, and it offered something that signified more than anything else to individuals whose faces distributed tickets. Discretion. Margaret Anderson comprehended her clientele. She instructed her staff never to acknowledge celebrities by designation in public spaces. No autograph seekers would be permitted on the grounds. No photographers in the dining chambers. What transpired at the Beverly Hills Hotel remained at the Beverly Hills Hotel. This code of silence would become the foundation of the hotel's reputation. The initial film star to discover the property was Douglas Fairbanks, the athletic leading man who would become one of the most substantial designations in silent film. Fairbanks checked in shortly after the hotel opened and immediately recognized what Anderson had generated. This was not merely a hotel, it was a refuge. In 1919, Fairbanks married Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart, in a ceremony that made them the most famous couple in the nation. They honeymooned at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Their presence provided the property a celebrity endorsement that no advertising budget could acquire. Within a year of that honeymoon, the hotel's guest registry examined like a catalogue of American fame. Charlie Chaplin consumed a suite on the secondary floor. Gloria Swanson held court in the dining chamber. Rudolph Valentino, the smoldering star whose elimination in 1926 would generate mass hysteria, maintained a permanent residence. Will Rogers, the cowboy philosopher whose homespun humor made him the highest-paid entertainer in America, resided at the hotel for months at a duration. The architecture facilitated the privacy these performers required. The main structure contained standard hotel chambers, but the genuine prize was the collection of bungalows scattered across the 12 acres of gardens. These detached structures, some containing as numerous as 6 chambers, offered complete separation from the main property. A star could entertain guests, conduct business, or carry on an affair without ever entering the public spaces. The bungalows possessed their own entrances, their own phone lines, and adequate distance from neighbors to ensure that whatever sounds emerged would be absorbed by tropical foliage. Margaret Anderson retired in 1928, distributing her interest to a group of investors. The property continued to prosper. By the late 1920s, the Beverly Hills Hotel had established itself as the unofficial headquarters of the film industry. Stars resided there. Directors held consultations in the lobby. Producers brokered arrangements over lunch. The stock market collapsed in October of 1929. The Great Depression that followed devastated the American economy, but Hollywood proved surprisingly resilient. Individuals still required entertainment. Film attendance remained strong throughout the 1930s, and the Beverly Hills Hotel benefited from the industry's survival. While other luxury properties across the nation closed their entrances, the Pink Palace on Sunset Boulevard remained open. In 1941, the hotel transformed hands again. A group of investors led by Hernando Cortright and Ben Silverstein acquired the property for $1.5 million, approximately $31 million in today's currency. Cortright had previously managed the El Mirador Hotel in Palm Springs and comprehended the peculiar demands of celebrity clientele. Under his management, the Beverly Hills Hotel would reach its absolute zenith. Cortright's initial innovation was the Polo Lounge. Prior to 1941, the hotel's main dining chamber served meals in the formal European style. Cortright recognized that Hollywood power brokers preferred a more casual atmosphere for their business dealings. He converted a small bar off the main lobby into an intimate space decorated with English writing memorabilia. The designation was pure marketing. There was no polo field nearby, but the sport connoted wealth and sophistication. The Polo Lounge opened in 1941 and immediately became the most significant chamber in Hollywood. Studio executives held breakfast consultations there to discuss casting and budgets. Agents negotiated contracts over lunch. Screenwriters pitched concepts to producers over beverages. The round leather booths offered just adequate privacy for confidential conversations while remaining visible adequate to signal your significance. To be witnessed in the Polo Lounge signified you mattered. The chamber developed its own rituals. Booth 1. Closest to the entrance, was reserved for the most powerful individuals in the industry. Louis B. Maya, the ruthless head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, claimed it as his personal territory. When he entered for his regular breakfast, the staff knew to position him there without inquiring. The hotel's phone infrastructure became legendary. In the era before cell phones, the Polo Lounge maintained a network of phones that could be brought tableside on extended cords. A businessman conducting an arrangement could consume calls without departing his booth. Witnesses reported witnessing powerful men juggling multiple handsets simultaneously, negotiating 3 separate contracts while their eggs grew cold. Darryl Zanuck, the head of 20th Century Fox, conducted so substantial business at the hotel that he installed a direct phone line from his office to his regular booth. When Zanuck was in the Polo Lounge, which was nearly every day, his staff knew precisely where to reach him. The menu itself became component of Hollywood lore. The McCarthy salad, invented by the Polo Lounge chef in the 1960s, consisted of chopped greens, turkey, cheese, and avocado mixed tableside. It became the signature dish ordered by executives who desired a meal substantial adequate to fuel hours of consultations, but light adequate not to induce drowsiness. The salad remains on the menu today, essentially unchanged. Beyond the Polo Lounge, the hotel continued to serve as a residential address for Hollywood's elite. Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire who would eventually descend into paranoid madness, maintained multiple bungalows simultaneously during the 1940s. He utilized them as offices for his various business enterprises and as hideaways for the actresses he was courting. Hughes would remain a fixture at the hotel for years, his increasingly bizarre behavior tolerated because his funds remained beneficial. Elizabeth Taylor resided at the Beverly Hills Hotel during multiple periods of her tumultuous existence. She occupied Bungalow 5 so frequently that the staff commenced calling it the Elizabeth Taylor Bungalow. She recuperated there between marriages. She entertained lovers there between divorces. The hotel also attracted visitors from beyond the entertainment industry. Presidents remained there. Foreign dignitaries maintained suites during visits to California. Business tycoons from the East Coast discovered that a week at the Beverly Hills Hotel opened entrances that remained closed to them in New York or Chicago. The property had become more than a hotel. It had become a symbol of arrival. But the glamour was not without cost. The identical privacy that protected stars also concealed darker activities. Affairs flourished in the bungalows. Illegal gambling operations operated out of particular suites with the staff's silent cooperation. Drug utilization, though rarely acknowledged publicly, was an open secret among longtime employees. The hotel's policy of silence protected everyone equally. A star caught with someone else's spouse could trust that the night manager would not contact the gossip columnists. A producer conducting negotiations that violated antitrust laws knew the hotel phones were not monitored. The Beverly Hills Hotel had become a category of Vatican for the entertainment industry, a sovereign territory where normal regulations did not apply. The property reached its cultural zenith in the 1950s and early 1960s. These were the years when the studio infrastructure still controlled Hollywood, when a handful of executives could make or destroy careers with a single phone contact, when being witnessed in the appropriate location at the appropriate duration could transform your existence. And the appropriate location was almost always the Beverly Hills Hotel. Marilyn Monroe maintained a standing reservation during her years in Hollywood. She would disappear into the bungalows for days at a duration, emerging only for film shoots or carefully staged public appearances. The hotel staff absorbed to anticipate her necessities without being informed. Fresh flowers delivered daily. Champagne chilled to precisely the appropriate temperature. Adequate privacy to conceal from a world that would eventually consume her. Frank Sinatra treated the hotel as a secondary residence. During his Hollywood years, he held court in the Polo Lounge surrounded by the rotating cast of celebrities and hangers-on recognized as the Rat Pack. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop would join him for marathon drinking sessions that stretched from lunch into the early morning hours. The management tolerated behavior that would have gotten lesser guests ejected. Sinatra's funds and fame acquired him immunity. The hotel also attracted figures from the darker corners of American existence. Sam Giancana, the Chicago mob boss who would later be linked to CIA plots against Fidel Castro, remained at the Beverly Hills Hotel during his trips to the West Coast. He conducted business in the bungalows, meeting with studio executives who required his cooperation to maintain their Las Vegas casinos operating smoothly. The overlap between Hollywood and organized crime was never discussed openly, but it was never entirely concealed either. In March of 1964, something transpired in Bungalow 8 that would haunt the hotel for decades. The precise details remain disputed, but the outline is transparent. A woman was discovered, deceased. The elimination was ruled accidental. The police investigation was brief. No charges were filed, but rumors persisted that powerful individuals had been present when she perished, that evidence had been destroyed, that the hotel's famous discretion had crossed the boundary into conspiracy. The hotel never acknowledged the incident publicly. The bungalow was cleaned, redecorated, and rented to new guests as if nothing had transpired. Staff members who had functioned that night either quit or absorbed not to discuss what they had witnessed. The woman's designation appeared in a few gossip columns, then faded from memory. But among longtime residents and industry insiders, the narrative became component of the hotel's oral history. Something dark had transpired in the Pink Palace, and the walls had absorbed the secret. The incident marked a turning point. Through the mid-1960s, the hotel commenced to forfeit its grip on Hollywood's imagination. The studio infrastructure was collapsing. A new generation of filmmakers was emerging. Directors who possessed no interest in the aged power structures and no patience for the rituals of the Polo Lounge. Young actors preferred the counterculture enclaves of Laurel Canyon to the manicured luxury of Beverly Hills. The hotel that had defined Hollywood glamour for half a century suddenly appeared like a relic. Attendance at the Polo Lounge declined. The bungalows positioned vacant for weeks at a duration. The once immaculate grounds demonstrated signs of deferred maintenance. The property was still profitable, but the cultural dominance was slipping away. In 1954, the hotel had been distributed to Ben Silverstein for $5.5 million. Approximately $62 million today. Silverstein had made his fortune in real estate and petroleum. He comprehended the value of the property, but he also recognized that its glory days might be concluding. When he perished in 1976, his estate confronted a difficult determination. Distribute while it still possessed value or maintain on and hope for cultural revival. The family selected to distribute. In 1979, they accepted an offer from Marvin Davis, a petroleum man from Denver, who paid $135 million for the property, approximately $565 million in today's currency. Davis promised to restore the hotel to its former glory. He pledged $100 million for renovations. The Beverly Hills Hotel, he declared, would once again become the center of Hollywood. Davis maintained his promise. He invested lavishly on restoration. The bungalows were gutted and reconstructed with modern amenities while preserving their original charm. The Polo Lounge was redecorated in the style of an English gentleman's club. The gardens were replanted with even more exotic specimens. Fresh coats of that signature pink paint covered every surface. By the duration Davis finished in 1982, the hotel appeared as magnificent as it had in its 1950s heyday.
But Davis also made a determination that would nearly destroy everything he had constructed. In 1987, he distributed the Beverly Hills Hotel for $200 million to a buyer whose identity would spark immediate controversy. The new owner was Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah of Brunei, one of the wealthiest men in the world. His small nation on the island of Borneo positioned atop vast petroleum and natural gas reserves that had made the royal family incomprehensibly wealthy. The Sultan's personal fortune was estimated at $20 billion. He collected Rolls-Royces the approach other individuals collected stamps. He possessed palaces across Asia and Europe. Now he possessed the Beverly Hills Hotel. Initially, the distribution appeared like a blessing. The Sultan promised to maintain the property's standards. He pledged to preserve its character. He assured Hollywood that nothing would transform. For several years, his promises maintained. The hotel continued to operate as it always had. The Polo Lounge remained packed with industry executives. The bungalows remained booked. The pink facade continued to dominate Sunset Boulevard. But in 2014, the Sultan's government enacted a series of laws that would transform the Beverly Hills Hotel from Hollywood's throne chamber into its most controversial property. Brunei adopted a strict interpretation of Sharia law that included punishments widely condemned by human rights organizations. The new penal code designated for elimination by stoning for adultery and homosexuality. It mandated flogging for alcohol consumption and pregnancy outside marriage. The laws applied to both citizens and visitors to Brunei, generating an international outcry. The connection to the Beverly Hills Hotel was immediate and undeniable. The Sultan possessed the property through his investment corporation, the Brunei Investment Agency. Revenue from the hotel circulated directly into the royal treasury of a government that had just criminalized homosexuality with the elimination penalty. To remain at the Beverly Hills Hotel, critics argued, was to financially support a regime that murdered gay individuals. Hollywood, an industry that had loudly championed LGBTQ rights, confronted an impossible circumstance. The hotel that had sheltered the industry's secrets for a century now represented values that contradicted everything modern Hollywood claimed to believe. The response was swift and severe. Jay Leno, the comedian and former Tonight Show host, was the initial major figure to articulate out. He designated for a boycott of all Brunei-possessed properties, which included not just the Beverly Hills Hotel but also the Hotel Bel Air and several luxury properties in London and Paris. Other celebrities quickly joined. Ellen DeGeneres, Richard Branson and Stephen Fry all announced they would no longer patronize the hotel. The Human Rights Campaign, the largest LGBTQ advocacy organization in America, officially designated for a boycott. The boycott devastated the hotel's business. Major talent agencies cancelled their regular consultations at the Polo Lounge. The Motion Picture and Television Fund relocated its annual fundraiser to another venue. The Feminist Majority Foundation relocated its awards ceremony. Conference organizers, who had booked the hotel's ballrooms for years, discovered different locations. Within months, the hotel that had been the center of Hollywood's social calendar became a ghost town. The staff suffered most. Numerous employees had functioned at the hotel for decades. Some had invested their entire careers there. They possessed nothing to accomplish with the Sultan's policies in Brunei, but they observed their tips disappear as the boycott vacated the dining chambers and cancelled reservations. Housekeepers who had once serviced completely booked floors discovered themselves cleaning vacant chambers. Bartenders who had served Hollywood's elite now served occasional tourists who either did not recognize about the boycott or did not care. The hotel's management attempted to contain the destruction. They issued statements emphasizing that the property's employees were Americans who shared Hollywood's values. They pointed out that the hotel possessed a diverse staff that included numerous LGBTQ workers. They argued that boycotting the hotel only harmed innocent individuals while accomplishing nothing to transform policies in Brunei. The arguments made no distinction. The financial impact was catastrophic. Industry sources estimated the hotel forfeited tens of millions of dollars in revenue during the initial year alone. Occupancy rates plummeted from above 80% to below 40%. The bungalows, which once required reservations months in advance, positioned vacant for weeks. The Polo Lounge, which had defined power in Hollywood for 70 years, served lunch to scattered tables of tourists. Some defended the hotel. They argued that boycotts rarely achieved their stated objectives and frequently harmed the incorrect individuals. They pointed out that numerous protesters possessed no difficulty accomplishing business with other nations that violated human rights. They noted that the Sultan would not suffer financially from the boycott. His petroleum revenues dwarfed whatever he earned from the hotel. The only individuals genuinely harmed were the workers. But the boycott supporters countered that principles signified more than convenience. They argued that Hollywood had invested decades concealing its compromises behind closed entrances and that the duration had arrived to assume a public position. The Beverly Hills Hotel, they articulated, was a perfect target precisely because it had signified so substantial to the industry for so extended. To abandon it was to transmit a message that some values could not be acquired at any price. The boycott also compelled Hollywood to confront its own complicated relationship with the property. For decades, the hotel had protected powerful men who abused their positions. It had sheltered affairs that destroyed families. It had provided cover for drug utilization, illegal gambling, and financial crimes. The industry had celebrated this discretion when it served their interests. Now, when discretion protected a foreign government's oppression, suddenly silence was unacceptable. The contrast did not proceed unnoticed. Critics pointed out that numerous celebrities who loudly boycotted the hotel had previously ignored human rights violations by other business partners. Hollywood had maintained profitable relationships with nations whose governments imprisoned dissidents, censored artists, and denied fundamental freedoms. The Beverly Hills Hotel had simply become a convenient target. The Sultan demonstrated no signs of distributing. He had paid $200 million for the property in 1987. By 2014, it was valued at least $500 million, possibly more. The hotel generated revenue even during the boycott. The Sultan could afford to wait out the protesters. As the boycott stretched from months into years, the hotel's emptiness became its own category of monument. The Pink Palace still dominated Sunset Boulevard. The grounds remained immaculate, but the cultural influence it had wielded for a century was gone. The boycott reached its zenith intensity in 2015 and 2016. Protest groups organized demonstrations outside the hotel's entrance on Sunset Boulevard. Activists distributed flyers to passing tourists clarifying why they should avoid the property. Social media campaigns encouraged travelers to book elsewhere. The Pink Palace had become Hollywood's most visible moral battleground. Inside the hotel, the staff attempted to maintain normality. Chambers were cleaned whether guests occupied them or not. The Polo Lounge served breakfast to whoever arrived through the entrances. The gardens were maintained with the identical care they had received for decades, but the sense of abandonment was inescapable. A hotel designed for crowds experienced haunted when vacant. Some long-time guests continued to patronize the property despite the boycott. They were mostly older industry veterans who remembered when the hotel had been the center of their professional existences. They resented being informed where they could and could not invest their funds. They argued that personal loyalty to the staff signified more than symbolic gestures. But even these defenders arrived reduced frequently as the social pressure mounted. The hotel attempted various strategies to survive. Management offered steep discounts to fill chambers. They marketed aggressively to international tourists who recognized nothing about the boycott. They emphasized the property's history and architectural significance, hoping heritage tourism could replace the industry business they had forfeited. None of it restored what had been consumed away. By 2017, the boycott had become self-sustaining. Even individuals who disagreed with it avoided the hotel because everyone else avoided it. The property had become culturally radioactive. To be witnessed entering the Beverly Hills Hotel was to invite criticism and questions. It was easier to simply proceed somewhere else. The hotel's predicament raised uncomfortable questions about how far moral responsibility extends. The staff possessed no regulation over the Sultan's policies. The management team in Los Angeles could not influence determinations made in Brunei. Yet they all suffered the ramifications of selections made by individuals they would never encounter. The boycott punished proximity rather than culpability. Some employees quit out of frustration or financial necessity. Others remained, hoping the boycott would eventually conclude. They had invested decades in their careers at the hotel. They possessed expertise that was not easily transferable to other properties. They waited and hoped that Hollywood's attention span would prove as short as its memory. The circumstance also exposed the limitations of celebrity activism. Numerous stars who loudly supported the boycott continued to function with corporations that accomplish business in nations with equally troubling human rights records. Film studios maintained distribution arrangements with authoritarian governments. Luxury brands manufactured products in nations that suppressed free speech. Tech corporations constructed infrastructure for surveillance states. But the Beverly Hills Hotel became the singular focus of outrage because it was visible, accessible, and symbolically significant. Meanwhile, in Brunei, the Sultan demonstrated no signs of reconsidering his policies. The international criticism possessed no apparent effect on his government's actions. The boycott that had devastated a hotel in Los Angeles did not transform a single law in Brunei. The only tangible result was vacant chambers and unemployed workers thousands of miles from the policies they were being punished for. By 2019, the boycott had lasted 5 years. The hotel's occupancy had stabilized at levels far below its historical averages, but elevated adequate to remain operational. The property still transformed a profit, though nothing like the returns it had generated before 2014. The Sultan, whose net worth was estimated at over $28 billion, could afford to wait indefinitely. Hollywood relocated on to other causes. The industry's attention shifted to newer controversies. Some of the celebrities who had led the boycott quietly resumed attending events at other Brunei-possessed properties. The moral clarity that had appeared so absolute in 2014 had softened into pragmatic compromise. But the destruction to the Beverly Hills Hotel persisted. The hotel that had defined Hollywood glamour had become a cautionary tale about the price of association. For more than a century, the Pink Palace had succeeded by offering discretion, luxury, and access to influence. The boycott revealed that these qualities could no longer protect an institution when the political winds shifted. The identical industry that had once valued the hotel's willingness to examine the other approach now condemned it for precisely that tendency. The narrative of the Beverly Hills Hotel had always been about more than architecture and amenities. It had been about influence and access, about who obtained to determine what signified and what could be ignored. The boycott compelled a reckoning with that history. The hotel had survived because it served powerful individuals. When those individuals determined it no longer served their interests, survival became uncertain. As the boycott entered its 6th year in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic struck. Hotels across the world closed or operated at minimal capacity. Travel ceased. Events were cancelled. The Beverly Hills Hotel, already weakened by years of boycott, confronted a new existential threat. The Pink Palace, that had survived depressions, wars, and cultural revolutions, now confronted a global crisis, with its reputation in ruins and its finances precarious. The pandemic compelled the Beverly Hills Hotel to close its entrances for the initial duration in its history. On March 17, 2020, California Governor Gavin Newsom issued a statewide shelter-in-place order. Within days, the hotel suspended operations. The Pink Palace, that had never arrested serving guests through 2 world wars and the Great Depression, proceeded dark. The closure lasted 4 months. During that duration, the property positioned vacant except for essential maintenance staff. The gardens continued to be watered. The structures were cleaned, but no guests wandered the grounds. No arrangements were made in the polo lounge. The bungalows stood vacant. For the initial duration since 1912, silence settled over the 12 acres. When the hotel reopened in July of 2020, it confronted a transformed world. International travel had collapsed. Business conferences had relocated online. The entertainment industry had largely shut down production. The few individuals who required hotel chambers could select from dozens of properties desperate for business. The Beverly Hills Hotel, already weakened by 6 years of boycott, now competed in a market where every establishment struggled to survive. The pandemic possessed an unexpected effect on the boycott. With Hollywood focused on survival rather than activism, The protests faded. The demonstrations outside the hotel arrested. Social media campaigns relocated onto other circumstances. The moral outrage that had sustained the boycott for years simply evaporated as individuals confronted more immediate crisis. The hotel benefited not from forgiveness, but from irrelevance. As travel gradually resumed in 2021 and 2022, the Beverly Hills Hotel discovered it had been granted a strange reprieve. A new generation of visitors possessed no memory of the boycott's intensity. Younger travelers recognized the property primarily through Instagram, where the pink walls and tropical gardens photographed beautifully. Influencers commenced posting from the hotel again. Their millions of followers witnessed only aesthetics, not politics. The hotel's management recognized the opportunity. They invested heavily in social media marketing, emphasizing the property's visual appeal rather than its controversial ownership. They partnered with luxury brands for promotional events. They offered package arrangements that included spa treatments and dining experiences. They repositioned the Beverly Hills Hotel as an Instagram destination rather than a Hollywood institution. The strategy functioned superior than anyone anticipated. By 2023, occupancy had recovered to levels not witnessed since before the boycott commenced. The bungalows were booked months in advance. The Polo Lounge served meals to capacity crowds. The hotel had not regained its position as Hollywood's throne chamber, but it had discovered a different category of relevance for a different era. The recovery revealed something uncomfortable about modern activism. The boycott that had appeared so morally necessary in 2014 had been abandoned, not because the Sultan transformed his policies, but because individuals simply arrested caring. Brunei's laws remained unchanged. The hotel's ownership remained unchanged. What transformed was public attention. Some of the original boycott supporters were disturbed by this development. They argued that resuming business with the hotel represented a moral failure, a capitulation to convenience over principle. They pointed out that the Sultan's government still maintained the identical oppressive laws that had sparked the boycott. Nothing had been resolved. The difficulty had simply been forgotten. But others witnessed the boycott's collapse as inevitable. They had always argued that celebrity activism was performative rather than principled, designed to generate positive publicity rather than achieve concrete transformation. The pandemic had proved their point. When maintaining the boycott became inconvenient, it disappeared. The lesson was transparent. Moral positions lasted only as extended as they served the self-interest of those assuming them. The hotel's staff, who had suffered through years of vacant chambers and diminished tips, mostly experienced relief. They had never requested to become symbols in someone else's political battle. They had simply desired to accomplish their jobs and support their families. The return of guests signified the return of income. Whatever moral complexities surrounded the hotel's ownership, they required to pay rent. The recovery also demonstrated the limitations of boycotts as instruments for social transformation. The Beverly Hills Hotel had been targeted because it was visible, prestigious, and vulnerable to public pressure. The campaign had succeeded in destroying the property's business, but it had failed to achieve its stated objective of compelling the Sultan to transform Brunei's laws. The Sultan, insulated by billions of dollars in petroleum wealth, had simply waited out the protesters. In the conclusion, the boycott harmed American workers far more than it harmed a Southeast Asian monarch. By 2024, the hotel had largely escaped its pariah status. A new generation of celebrities commenced holding events there again. Studios booked the ballrooms for premieres and parties. Industry executives returned to the Polo Lounge for breakfast consultations. The Pink Palace was being welcomed return into Hollywood's embrace, not because anyone had forgotten what transpired, but because forgetting had proven easier than remembering. The hotel's resurrection raised questions about institutional memory and collective responsibility. The structure itself had not transformed. The ownership had not transformed. The laws in Brunei had not transformed. What had transformed was whether anyone experienced obligated to care. The boycott's collapse suggested that moral outrage, no matter how loudly expressed, possessed a limited shelf existence in a culture defined by short attention spans and perpetual distraction. The hotel's path return from controversy required more than simply waiting for individuals to forget. Management comprehended they required to actively reconstruct the property's reputation while acknowledging its complicated history. The approach they adopted was strategic silence combined with visual reinvention. Rather than defend the Sultan's ownership or apologize for the boycott, the hotel simply arrested discussing politics entirely. Press inquiries about Brunei proceeded unanswered. Requests for statements were politely declined. The property presented itself as an architectural landmark and luxury destination, nothing more. The strategy functioned because it permitted guests to return without possessing to publicly defend their selection. The hotel also invested millions in renovations designed to refresh its image without erasing its history. The bungalows received complete interior overhauls. Modern technology was installed throughout the property. The Polo Lounge was redesigned to experience simultaneously classic and contemporary. The transformations signaled that this was not the identical hotel that had been boycotted. Even though legally and structurally nothing fundamental had transformed, the physical transformation signified reduced than the cultural one. The Beverly Hills Hotel had always succeeded by examining the zeitgeist and adapting to it. In the 1940s, that signified generating the Polo Lounge for industry power brokers. In the 1950s, it signified providing bungalows for stars seeking privacy. In the 2020s, it signified becoming an Instagram destination for a generation that valued aesthetics over history. The hotel's social media presence exploded. Professional photographers were hired to capture the property's most photogenic angles. Influencers were invited to remain in exchange for posts. The distinctive pink facade appeared in thousands of photographs shared across platforms. For young travelers planning trips to Los Angeles, the Beverly Hills Hotel became a must-visit location, not because of its history, but because of how it appeared on a phone screen. This transition from institutional influence center to visual destination marked a fundamental shift in what the hotel represented. For most of its existence, the Beverly Hills Hotel had signified because of who remained there and what transpired behind closed entrances. The discretion that protected those secrets was the source of its value. But in an era where privacy had become nearly impossible and social media transformed private moments into public performances, discretion no longer carried the identical premium. The hotel adapted by embracing visibility rather than secrecy. The grounds that had once been carefully shielded from photographers now welcomed them. The pink walls that had observed a century of confidential consultations became backdrops for public displays. The property that had constructed its reputation on recognizing when to examine away now constructed it on being examined at. Some long-time industry figures lamented the transformation. They remembered when the Beverly Hills Hotel had been a sanctuary, a location where business could be conducted and affairs managed without fear of exposure. The new openness experienced like a betrayal of everything the hotel had represented. But their complaints carried little weight. The industry itself had transformed. The studio infrastructure that had made the Polo Lounge essential no longer existed. The category of consolidated influence that required discrete meeting spaces had fragmented into 1,000 smaller operations. The hotel's traditional operation had become obsolete before the boycott ever commenced. The property's recovery also benefited from broader cultural amnesia about the boycott itself. By 2024, numerous of the celebrities who had led the campaign had relocated on to other causes, or simply arrested discussing it. Some had been accused of hypocrisy for continuing to function with other morally compromised entities. Others had discovered that sustained activism was harder than momentary outrage. The boycott faded because maintaining it required energy that individuals were unwilling to invest. The hotel's staff, who had resided through the entire crisis, developed their own comprehension of what had transpired. They had observed their workplace become a political symbol overnight. They had suffered financially for determinations they possessed no component in making. They had observed the boycott's intensity and its eventual collapse. Numerous arrived away with deep cynicism about celebrity activism and moral posturing. They had absorbed that principles were flexible and that outrage possessed an expiration date. The Beverly Hills Hotel's survival also depended on one undeniable actuality. It occupied some of the most valuable real estate in Los Angeles. The 12 acres at Sunset and Rodeo Drive were valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, regardless of what structure positioned on them. The Sultan could afford to forfeit funds on the hotel indefinitely because the land itself was an appreciating asset. Even if the property never regained its former glory, it would retain enormous value. By 2025, the hotel had completely resumed operations at pre-boycott levels. Chamber rates ranged from $700 per night for standard accommodations to over $10,000 for the most exclusive bungalows, prices comparable to other luxury properties in Los Angeles. The Polo Lounge once again required reservations days in advance. Industry events returned to the ballrooms. The Pink Palace had reclaimed its position in Hollywood's landscape. But the hotel that emerged from the boycott was fundamentally different from the one that had entered it. The institutional influence it had wielded for decades had evaporated. The cultural centrality it had appreciated had shifted elsewhere. What remained was a beautiful structure with a complicated history, serving a clientele that valued aesthetics and luxury over the deeper significances the property had once embodied. The recovery process revealed harsh truths about institutional survival in the modern era. Loyalty signified nothing when maintaining it became inconvenient. Moral principles could be discarded when they conflicted with personal desires. Public memory lasted only as extended as the subsequent scandal. The Beverly Hills Hotel had survived not by transforming anything fundamental about itself, but by outlasting its critics' attention spans. Today, the Beverly Hills Hotel positions precisely where it has positioned since 1912. The salmon pink facade still dominates the corner of Sunset and Rodeo Drive. The 12 acres of tropical gardens still flourish in a climate that should not support them. The bungalows still offer privacy to guests who can afford their rates. From the outside, very little has transformed. But the structure's relationship to Hollywood has been permanently altered. The hotel is no longer where influence resides. It is where influence occasionally visits. The Polo Lounge still serves breakfast, but the arrangements that shape the entertainment industry now transpire in conference chambers at streaming corporations and technology firms. The bungalows still accommodate celebrities, but their affairs are more probable to be exposed on social media than protected by hotel staff. The discretion that defined the property for a century has become impossible to maintain in an age of constant surveillance and instant communication. The hotel's survival raises questions about what institutions signify and whether their significance can survive radical transformations in context. The Beverly Hills Hotel was constructed to serve a particular Hollywood, one dominated by a handful of studios and defined by careful regulation of public image. That Hollywood no longer exists. The industry has fragmented into hundreds of production corporations, streaming platforms, and independent creators. The centralized influence that made the Polo Lounge essential has dissipated, yet the structure endures. It endures partly because of its location, partly because of its architecture, and partly because some narratives are too beneficial to permit perish. The Beverly Hills Hotel has become a monument to its own history, a location where individuals proceed not because they require to, but because the designation carries weight. That weight is no longer influence. It is nostalgia. Ambulate through the lobby today and you will witness tourists photographing the pink walls, influencers staging content in the gardens, wealthy travelers from around the world who desire to experience a piece of Hollywood mythology. You might also witness a few industry veterans possessing lunch in the Polo Lounge, but they are outnumbered by individuals who possess no connection to the entertainment business and accomplish not particularly care about the hotel's complicated past. The staff who function there now have mostly joined since the boycott concluded. They recognize the history in outline, but did not reside through the crisis. For them, the Beverly Hills Hotel is simply a workplace, one that transpires to be famous and occasionally controversial. They transform the linens, serve the meals, maintain the grounds, and precede residents at the conclusion of their shifts. The mythology that surrounds the property exists separate from their daily experience of it. The hotel's narrative compels a reckoning with uncomfortable questions about complicity and responsibility. For more than a century, the Beverly Hills Hotel protected powerful individuals who utilized that protection to conceal affairs, crimes, and corruption. The industry that now condemned the hotel for its ownership had previously celebrated it for precisely that discretion. The moral outrage that fueled the boycott was selective at optimal and hypocritical at most unfortunate. But the boycott also revealed something genuine about transforming values. Hollywood in 2014 was different from Hollywood in 1954 or 1914. The industry that had once valued privacy above principle had been compelled by social movements and public pressure to at least perform commitment to civil rights. The Beverly Hills Hotel became an evaluation of whether that commitment signified anything. The evaluation revealed that commitment was genuine, adequate to generate economic destruction, but not strong, adequate to last. The structure itself bears witness to all of it. The walls that once absorbed the sounds of opera practice now absorb the clicks of smartphone cameras. The bungalows that sheltered Hollywood legends now accommodate Instagram influencers. The Polo Lounge that brokered studio contracts now serves brunch to tourists. The hotel has survived by becoming something different while appearing precisely the identical. There is a lesson in that survival about the nature of institutions. They persist, not because they maintain their original purpose, but because they adapt to serve new ones. The Beverly Hills Hotel no longer defines Hollywood influence, because Hollywood influence no longer requires definition. It has scattered into 1,000 locations and exists primarily in contracts negotiated by email and Zoom. But the hotel still offers something valuable. It offers a connection to a mythical past, a chance to ambulate where legends ambulated, to position where arrangements were made, to sleep in beds where stars once slept. Whether that is adequate to sustain an institution for another century remains uncertain. The hotel confronts challenges that possess nothing to accomplish with boycotts or politics. Los Angeles is transforming. The city that once revolved around the entertainment industry now accommodates technology corporations, finance firms, and international corporations. The subsequent generation of wealthy travelers may not care about Hollywood history. They may prefer hotels that reflect contemporary values rather than nostalgic ones. The Sultan still possesses the property. His investment corporation demonstrates no interest in distributing. The hotel remains profitable, adequate to justify maintaining it as a long-term asset. The land alone guarantees its value. Whatever transpires to the structure, the 12 acres at Sunset and Rodeo will always be valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. But structures are more than real estate. They are narratives made physical. The Beverly Hills Hotel narrative is about ambition and accommodation, about influence and its limitations, about how institutions serve the powerful until influence shifts elsewhere. It is about discretion maintained until discretion becomes complicity. It is about survival acquired at the cost of significance. The Pink Palace positions as a monument to American celebrity culture, to all its glamour and all its compromises. It has observed romance and treachery, genius and scandal, triumph and tragedy. It has sheltered presidents and criminals, artists and frauds. It has survived depressions, wars, boycotts, and a pandemic. It survives still, not as Hollywood's throne chamber, not as the center of American entertainment, but as a beautiful structure with a complicated history, offering luxury to anyone willing to pay for it and overlook where the funds proceed. The walls no longer protect secrets. They simply position salmon pink against the California sky, incorporating chapters to a narrative that refuses to conclude. The Beverly Hills Hotel, where visions were made and compromises were concealed, where influence gathered and eventually scattered, where Hollywood absorbed to be Hollywood, then absorbed to be something else. Still standing, still pink.